Welcome back to Real Takes, where we are all movie love all the time. Tonight, we're starting the way we always do by highlighting an organization that I think deserves attention and support. And since we're still in Gay Pride Month, I want to highlight the Leslie Lohmann Museum in New York City, which features work by gay and trans artists, both current work and work from the historical work from the history. Nice, Anne. Work from the history. Sometimes work that might not otherwise get seen by artists who, might not get a platform in other institutions, or work we might see in other institutions, but from a perspective or through a lens that might not be represented elsewhere. So I will link below to the Leslie Lohmann Museum. Check them out. Please support them if you're so inclined. Tonight, we are shining all the movie love on the films that Marlene Dietrich made with the director Josef von Sternberg. Now, Marlene Dietrich was an original. She was an icon. She was probably about as close to being openly bisexual as you could be when you were a Hollywood film star in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. She did not, publicly talk about her exploits, although I don't think she publicly talked about her exploits with men either. But in 1955, Confidential magazine published an expose about how she'd been with women, and she never responded. And in that day and age, if, Confidential magazine or one of those other tabloids published these kind of stories, often the stars would sue or rebut or refute or, do the publicity rounds to, get ahead of the story. And she just let it sit. So, but long before 1955, I think just as important as who she was with in her personal life, I think it's even deeper that she was just unapologetically unempowered presence on screen with her sexuality in a way that we rarely have seen, honestly, even today on screen. There are very few women who I think kind of own their sexuality with a level of confidence and agency that Marlene Dietrich had off screen and on screen. And I assume that a lot of that comes because Marlene Dietrich was born in Germany, and she came up during the Weimar years in Germany between the First World War and the Second World War, and in the cabaret world. So basically think like the movie Cabaret, if you don't have a lot of references for that time. It's been described as a very decadent time in Berlin. Decadent has a certain puritanical, judgmental tinge to it, so I'm using that word hesitantly. It was a very open time. It was a time of great exploration, both creatively and sexually. And she came up in that culture. She was a cabaret performer. She had an act with another woman where they talked about their special relationship. And she was appearing in some films in Germany when she got cast in Josef von Sternberg's film The Blue Angel in 1930. Now, people like to say that Josef von Sternberg discovered her, or that he created her, or that she was the putty that he molded. And she even used some language like that over the years, and she always talked about him with the greatest of respect and referred to him as a genius. And, even though they didn't work together again after the 30s, she always talked about how special he was and what he did for her career. But I think, we have a very sexist relationship to this idea of the muse and the artist is creating everything. But I think Marlene brought a lot to the table to start with. And I would agree. What I would say is that Josef von Sternberg knew how to highlight what was powerful and exciting about her in a way that maybe no other filmmaker ever did. That's absolutely true. But I don't think she was a blank slate on which he, painted her. Okay, two things. One, I'm including a link below to Marlene Dietrich's screen test for Josef von Sternberg, so you can decide for yourself what she had or what she didn't have. She's a much rougher presence there than she ends up becoming in the von Sternberg films and in her other later work, but I think it's all kind of there. And then secondly, I don't want to sound like I'm denigrating von Sternberg as I try to punch a hole in this sexist idea of the artist and the muse. I think they were two artists who were perfectly suited for each other, who came together and made films that I love. I love his aesthetic. I love his skill and mastery. I love the themes of them. And I think they were a great, special, cinematic match of equal energies. And that's why what they did together was so special and why I love watching these films and talking about them and sharing them with you. She did rise to fame through these films with Josef von Sternberg, starting with The Blue Angel in 1930, which was made in Germany with Emil Jennings. I'm going to be honest with you, this is not a big favorite of mine. It's about a cabaret performer, Lola Lola, played by Marlene Dietrich, who is causing such a stir in a small town that a very conservative school teacher goes to find out what all his high school boys are distracted by, and he becomes obsessed with her and sort of becomes, they marry, but he becomes like her. It becomes very sadomasochistic, and she's cruel to him, and he's tormented and humiliated, and it's just not my kind of thing. But if you want to see how and why Marlene Dietrich is a star, watch The Blue Angel, because she comes on screen and you think, there is a movie star. Interestingly, the German company that produced that film did not pick up the option to sign her to more films, but Paramount saw an early copy of The Blue Angel before it was released in the United States, and they signed both von Sternberg and Marlene Dietrich to a multi-picture contract. And what they did was they held the release of The Blue Angel until Josef von Sternberg and Marlene Dietrich had made Morocco. So that's the next film they made together, obviously. And it also starred Gary Cooper and Adolphe Menjou. And it's about a cabaret performer in Morocco who's sort of down on her luck. And she is torn between two lovers. And it's, so we have to talk here, like when we talk about these films, I can give you the plot setup, but the movies aren't really about the plot. Josef von Sternberg was a master with light and shadow and filming. And these movies are so visually luscious and sumptuous. And he was kind of an unapologetic practitioner of more is more. I mean, the layers, the textures, the shadow, the light, the screen is just literally, sometimes exploding is the wrong term because that's sort of a violent idea, and there's something so sensual and sexual and soft about the work, but it's eye candy in the deepest, truest sense of the phrase. And some people, they tire a little of these films because there are a lot of long lingering shots, and in particular there are a lot of long lingering shots of Marlene Dietrich, and I am all fine with all of them. Bring on more long lingering shots of Marlene Dietrich on camera. He just knew how to create a visual moment on screen, and even though there are ways that a lot of those moments are static, they still feel so alive visually. They're just humming all the time. And Morocco is actually a very devastating love story about someone who's torn between like the connection that could be good for them and the connection that might not be good for them. And you know, how you like wrestle with those inner demons. It's not written the way that kind of story would be written today, but it's all happening inside Marlene Dietrich, and it's riveting. And for me, I think it's the strongest of the 7 films they made together. Marlene Dietrich likes The Devil is a Woman the best, if that, you know, means anything to you. Definitely check them out. I've seen all 7, and I think they all have, you know, huge strengths, and I love the aesthetic so much I could watch them. But my personal favorite is Shanghai Express, which was made in 1932 and co-starred May Wong and Clive Brook. Now, we need to acknowledge that Shanghai Express is rife with political problems. So first of all, it's called Shanghai Express. It's set on the train, the Shanghai Express, in China, and there's a love story and there's a political intrigue story, but the truth is the movie has nothing to do with China. It's just using the idea of China as an exotic aesthetic backdrop, which was something that happened a lot in film in the 30s and 40s, in less than the 40s, in Hollywood, and, you know, becomes especially offensive given how much discrimination there was against Asian and Asian American actors. So we're definitely culturally abusing an idea, a romanticized idea of Chinese aesthetic for Josef von Sternberg's visual delights. So that's problematic. There's yellow face in the film. There's a Swedish actor playing a Eurasian character who's kind of a political gobbledygook of various points of view. And even from what I've read and heard, the story in relation to what was actually happening in Chinese politics, like, doesn't make a lot of sense. So there are definitely ways that this film is a product of a certain kind of white cultural appropriation that, you know, I am not for. And I think for me, so if that rules this film out for some people, I totally respect that. And I also, you know, I'm a white woman. I am not subjected to that kind of discrimination by people, and I am not, you know, aching for richer, truer images of myself on film from that perspective. So I want to acknowledge that, you know, it might be easier for me to, you know, focus on what I think is strong about this film than what is weak about this film in comparison to Asian or Asian American viewers. But I do think there are some really powerful elements of this film that are way ahead of their time. So Marlene Dietrich and May Wong, it's kind of unclear whether they know each other before they get on the train or whether, but they share a car. on this train, and it becomes clear almost immediately that they are both high-class sex workers of some variety. That's never fleshed out because it's 1930s Hollywood. But she is the infamous Shanghai Lily who brings men to their knees, and May Wong is also a sex worker of some kind, and they are allies in this film, and they stand up for each other in ways that I don't know, you rarely see in cinema. Two women who aren't related, like, having each other's back in different ways. That is very powerful. And these two women have a lot of agency in this film. And also, May Wong's character, just gonna leave myself thinking there. How long does it take, Anne, to come up with a thought? So I realize we need to go back a little. May Wong is widely considered to be the first Chinese American movie star. She was born in LA and started skipping school very young to go watch movie shoots, and started making movies during the silent era, and then transitioned into talking films as well. She, while she did become a star in a way that no other Chinese American actor had until that point, being the first can be hard. And by the time she made this movie, she'd already gone to Europe and come back out of total frustration with the kinds of roles she was being given in Hollywood. She was, and the kinds of roles she couldn't get in Hollywood. So she was often in kind of B- thriller movies where she played, you know, a certain stereotype that became referred to as the dragon lady, sort of, you know, the worst kind of stereotyped idea of the eroticized, dangerous Asian woman with Oriental woman, I should say, with, you know, heavy makeup and, you know, beaded gowns and a knife up her sleeve, and she could put a spell on you, and that kind of bullshit, basically. And so she'd gone to Europe and made a couple of silent movies at the end of the silent era in England that were good enough and sort of showed off more of her talent enough that she then got a better contract back in Hollywood. But, you know, the challenges just continued. I mean, she was very proud of making this film because she was not that stereotype. She was not forced to do some, stereotyped Chinese accent. She just spoke with her voice. And she's not othered. She and Marlene Dietrich are in it together. And that's very powerful. And this is a bit of a spoiler, she's attacked and then she avenges herself. And I just can't tell you how radical that is for any woman in any classic American film, but in particular for an Asian woman in a film. It was, huge. So, she made this film, which is great. And then in the same year, there was a big Hollywood film made of a novel based in China, and she really wanted the female lead, and of course would have been the obvious choice, except that they cast Paul Muni as the main Chinese lead, who would have been her romantic interest. And because they couldn't show a white person and an Asian person or an Asian American person having a romantic relationship, they cast a white woman in the other role and then just heavily made them both up. So, this is the kind of insanity she was facing her whole career, and she would leave Hollywood and come back several times, but a huge, strong screen presence and a big part of why this film is so powerful. There are things about this film that are, that kind of left me speechless when I first saw it, because these two women, again, have like unapologetic, empowered sexuality. And yes, you know, there's a love story, and in the end, you know, Marlene Dietrich isn't going to be a sex worker anymore. I'll just leave it at that. But even within that kind of stereotypical story, she's making all the moves. She's making her decisions about what she wants. She's not sitting around waiting for men to come to her. Yeah, it's something to see, this movie, Shanghai Express. And it's hard to see, unfortunately. It's not always available to stream a lot of places. This is where, if you have your DVD player, you could go to your library and see if they have a copy of Shanghai Express or can get it, because it is worth it. And it is also so stunningly beautiful. And there are some famous close-up shots of Marlene Dietrich. And I think in a sort of overly romanticized 1930s Hollywood way, there's actually like an interesting character question going on about love and trust. So there's a lot going on in Shanghai Express, and it is a favorite of mine from the 30s, if you can't tell, and it is stunningly beautiful. Both Morocco and Shanghai Express had the same cinematographer, Lee Garms, and he won an Oscar for the cinematography on Shanghai Express. So, and I completely forgot to mention, I can't believe this, going back to Morocco, we're doing these films because we're celebrating queer pride. So Morocco is the film where Marlene Dietrich famously comes out for her cabaret act dressed in a tuxedo, and not a like feminized tuxedo, like she is wearing a man's tuxedo from top hat down to the spats, and she kisses a woman. And by today's standards, it is the most chaste, fleeting thing you've ever seen. For 1930 Hollywood, for a film that was released in the United States, it was a big deal. And she would cross-dress in film throughout her career. So her gender representation, I mean, in herself was, you know, in a lot of ways stereotypically female, but again, an empowered version of that, where she, you know, wore pants when she wanted to wear pants, and she cross-dressed in films, and there was never any sense that that was strange or different or weird. It's just who she was, and she was gonna do it. And so they made these 7 films together. By the mid to late 30s, this thing called the Hays Code that I've talked about before starts coming into effect, where all the studios were censoring themselves and towing a much more conservative line so that they would not get boycotted by the conservative, moral, puritanical, regressive forces in this country and risk not being shown in movie theaters. And by the way, this included a whole racist element to film as well, where, you know, interracial marriage couldn't be shown, and to appease the South, sometimes films would have 2 versions, one that was shot with maybe a more empowered Black character in it in most of the country, and then that would be edited out for the South. So, I mean, Hollywood was doing a lot of conservative stuff, and it was, you know, then after the war, in a more conservative time in the country, that kind of empowered sexual confidence that Marlene Dietrich had wasn't as welcome. But again, she made a lot of other films with other directors. Still, you know, her energy was her energy. So when she came on screen, everything kind of bowed to her on some level with all the other directors. But these 7 films she made with Josef von Sternberg were really special, and definitely brought, I'm repeating myself now, an unapologetic, empowered female sexual energy to the screen that was uniquely hers, confident in a way that might have been unprecedented in terms of women performing on screen, and for me is endlessly watchable. So Marlene Dietrich, in any film really, but in her Josef von Sternberg films, I'll list below where you can see them. And I hope you watch them. If you haven't seen them, if you like them, please comment, tell me, which ones you like, and I will see you next Wednesday. Thanks for watching Real Takes. Hit the subscribe button below so the algorithms will tell you when new episodes are out. And if you want to support Real Takes, please visit my Patreon page where you can join at any tier from $2 to $100 per thing I make. The $15 tier is specifically about supporting Real Takes, and you'll get behind the scenes information and be thanked in future videos. See you next Wednesday.